Hello and welcome to the fourth video in my series, What Makes a Great Melody? If you've been following the previous videos in this series, you may have realized that the title of the series is a bit misleading because the videos are not only about melodies, but also about other things, especially harmony, chord progressions. So it might be better to call the series What Makes a Great Theme or just What Makes a Great Piece of Music. And in this video, I'll be talking a lot about harmony as well. I should say also that my videos don't claim to do anything more than scratch the surface of what makes a great piece of music. You could think of the ideas in my videos as ingredients that composers sometimes use in their musical creations, but there are lots of other possible ingredients as well. Finally, I should note that while my previous videos have dealt with both classical and popular music, this one will be focused entirely on classical music. This video is about purple patches. What are purple patches? Well, I'm going to start with an example. It's the Lacrimosa from Mozart's Requiem. The Requiem is one of the last pieces Mozart wrote, and he never finished it. Everything that he wrote for this movement is on this slide, except for a two-measure introduction. Other people have written continuations for it, but we won't talk about those. Let's listen to it. Now everyone seems to agree that this is an extraordinarily effective piece of music. At least 3 different groups of researchers have used it in experimental studies of emotional responses to music. It's also been widely used in popular culture. Here's a commercial that uses it from 2014.
The last 4 hours have seen one child fail to get to the air sickness bag in time. Another left his shoes on the plane. His shoes. And a third just simply doesn't want to be here. Until now. Until right booking now. Planet Earth's #1 accommodation site, Booking.com.
Yeah.
What makes this piece of music so effective? Well, notice a few things about it. It starts by clearly establishing a key, D minor. Then it veers away from that key. First it touches on F major, then A minor, then C minor, or perhaps C major. It only comes back to D minor in the last 2 or perhaps 3 chords. In short, the piece establishes a key, then undermines it, and then returns to it. The musicologist Donald Francis Tovey once coined the term purple patch. He never defined it very precisely, but from his use of it, it seems to mean a fairly brief chromatic passage, that is, a passage that goes outside the scale of the prevailing key, that's followed by a return to that key, just like what we see in Mozart's Lacrimosa. I'm going to argue here that a purple patch, and particularly the reassertion of the main key after a purple patch, can be a very effective and satisfying musical device. I'm going to give some evidence that it is an effective device, and I'm going to try to explain why it's so effective. And along the way, I'll talk about some of the specific ways that purple patches are used. Let's start with a few more examples to get a feel for purple patches. Each of my examples features the establishment of a key, followed by chords that challenge the key or move away from it, and a return or reassertion of it at the end. Harmonies will be shown both in Roman numerals and in lead sheet symbols. Sometimes chords in the purple patch are shown as chromatic chords or applied chords in relation to the main key. Sometimes they're shown as actual modulations. There are a lot of judgment calls here, and you don't need to worry about the details. The important thing is the establishment of the main key at the beginning, shown before the first Roman numeral, the chromatic passage, shown by a purple bracket, and the return to the main key at the end. A red arrow will appear when the purple patch starts, and a second red arrow will appear when the main key returns. Purple patches occur in some of the most famous pieces in classical music. They're often near the end of the piece or near the end of a large section. The overture to Rossini's opera William Tell has a wonderful purple patch near the end. In Chopin's Revolutionary Etude in C minor, the coda has brief suggestions of G flat major and F flat major. These are very remote keys, more distant from C minor than anything that occurred earlier in the piece. The codas of Chopin's four ballades also have wonderful purple patches. In Tchaikovsky's Swan Lake, the famous theme at the beginning of Act 2 features a fantastic purple patch. You probably know the opening melody in B minor. Then a bit later we get this. It starts to get a bit purple with the first flat 2 chord. But over the next 8 measures it keeps coming back to 5 of the main key. The real purple patch is in the following 3 measures with that crazy B flat 7 chord. Here's a purple patch from the first movement of Schubert's Death and the Maiden string quartet. Unlike other examples shown here, this passage is actually near the beginning of the piece. The opening of Brahms's piano quintet also has a wonderful purple patch. Finally, here's one from the end of the final movement of Ravel's Le Tombeau de Couperin. The harmony is very complex, and I've just shown a few important chords. I hope you enjoy these purple patches as much as I do. But even if you do like purple patches, maybe it's just you and me. What is the evidence that people more broadly like purple patches? Well, there is some evidence for this, although it's anecdotal and indirect. Specifically, what people seem to find pleasurable is the return or reassertion of the tonic key after the purple patch, what I will call a tonal reassertion. The anecdotal evidence comes from statements by music theorists and other academic music experts. Music theorists don't usually get really excited about things, but I've noticed that when they do get excited, it's quite often about purple patches. Robert Hatton discusses the opening of Beethoven's Ghost Trio in D major, which could be said to have a very brief purple patch, just a single chromatic chord, the flat 6 chord. Hatton writes that the suspended uncertainty of the flat 6 chord is resolved rather gloriously into the cadential 6/4 chord that reasserts the main key. He describes the cadential 6/4 chord as a breakthrough. In Aldwell and Schachter's textbook on harmony, the last example in the book is a purple patch from a piano trio by Mozart. They say that the example is testimony to the immense scope of his genius. In his book about augmented 6 chords, Martin Ellis discusses what he calls triumphant progressions. He doesn't define very clearly what makes a progression feel triumphant, but his first example, from Verdi's Aida, is a perfect specimen of a purple patch. In his classic book, Emotion and Meaning in Music, the great musical thinker Leonard Meyer talks in a general way about purple patches and their emotional effect. He writes, "Chromatic passages of considerable duration, passages which are often modulatory, appear to be ambiguous because they obscure the feeling of tonal center. Such ambiguity creates suspense and uncertainty." Elsewhere in the book, he talks about the negative effect of this uncertainty and the positive effect when certainty is restored. He writes, "If the musical patterns are less clear than expected, then doubt and uncertainty as to the general significance, function, and outcome of the passage will result. The mind rejects and reacts against such uncomfortable states, and, if they are more than momentary, looks forward to and expects a return to the certainty of regularity and clarity." So a number of authors seem to agree about the pleasurable effect of purple patches, and especially tonal reassertions after purple patches. But again, this evidence is anecdotal. Is there any experimental evidence that tonal reassertions are enjoyable? There is evidence, though it's indirect. It comes from studies of musical tension. In a study by my friend Mary Farbood at NYU, listeners were played chord progressions establishing a key, moving to a second key, and then returning to the first key, and they rated tension at each point. When the passage in the second key was short, 13 seconds or less, listeners tended to perceive returns to the original key as a decrease in tension, suggesting that they continued to perceive it as the underlying key. But after a move lasting 21 seconds, the tonal return caused no decrease in tension. Other studies have also found that most listeners are unable to remember a key over long time intervals. Notably, none of the purple patches in the excerpts I played earlier is longer than 13 seconds. Tension is usually viewed as a negative emotional response. Several other studies suggest that highly chromatic or tonally ambiguous passages are higher in tension than tonally clear ones. So again, what seems to be happening is that purple patches themselves cause a slight decrease in pleasure, but they also make the return of the tonic key more pleasurable than it would otherwise be. If you're with me so far, and you agree that tonal reassertions after purple patches are enjoyable, then the question is, why are they enjoyable? At one level, I think the answer is pretty simple, and it's implicit in things I've already said. A chromatic passage creates uncertainty about the key. This gives rise to a mild anxiety or unease. When the main key is reasserted, our certainty is restored, bringing relief and comfort. In Meyer's words, the greater the buildup of suspense, of tension, the greater the emotional release upon resolution. Let's flesh this out a bit more, using Mozart's Lacrimosa as an example. At the beginning, we're pretty sure we're in D minor. When the chromatic passage starts, there are two possibilities. Maybe we're staying in D minor, and these chromatic chords are just momentary deviations from that underlying key. Key has a kind of inertia, and we tend to hold on to an established key if we can. But the chromatic chords could also represent a larger scale move to another key, perhaps C minor. We're not sure. These two possibilities are represented by the split red lines, and the intensity of the redness indicates our degree of certainty about each analysis. Then when we hear chords in D minor again, that makes it clear that we've been in D minor all along. One could hear the passage as moving to C minor and then moving back, but that would involve two key changes, which seems much less likely. You might wonder whether one or two chords are enough to reassert D minor. It's worth noting which chords are involved in the reassertion. In this example, and in many of the examples we've seen, the chord at the moment of reassertion is a second inversion tonic triad, a 1-6-4, leading to a 5 chord, that is, a cadential 6-4. The 6-4 chord arrives on a strong beat, which is another signal that it is acting as a cadential 6-4. Several authors, including me, have noted that a cadential 6-4 has a special power to assert a key, maybe because it typically occurs in situations where a key has been strongly established. It's even been suggested that the cadential 6-4 on its own has this key asserting power, even without the 5 chord that it resolves to. So this may be another factor that quickly reorients us towards D minor. If you go back to the Booking.com commercial, you'll see that it's right at the cadential 6-4 chord that we get the triumphant fist pump. It's also notable that the final chord of a purple patch, the chord just before the tonal reassertion, is often a German augmented 6th chord. German 6ths are interesting chords. While they are technically chromatic chords, each German 6th belongs to a specific key and could be said to support that key. This German 6th supports the key of D minor. If we spell it differently, however, a German 6th is also a dominant 7th chord in another key. It may be that we initially hear it that way, only realizing that it is a German 6th when we hear the following chord. It's like in a mystery story when we only realize the significance of an earlier clue at the moment that the mystery is resolved. So my argument is that tonal reassertions cause pleasure simply because they clarify the key structure of the piece after a period of uncertainty. This explanation might be okay as far as it goes, but it raises a deeper question. Why should our happiness be affected by our certainty about the key, or about anything in music? Let me make an analogy. Suppose you're driving around in a neighborhood that you're not familiar with. You leave the main road and start traversing the winding suburban lanes. I'm assuming that you don't have a navigation system or are too stubborn to use one like me. At a certain point, you become disoriented. You're not sure where you are or what direction you're going. In short, you're lost. I think you'll agree that this can be a bit stressful. You go on for a bit, and then suddenly you find that you're at the main road again, and you feel relief and pleasure. Why is this pleasurable? Simply put, because it's helpful to know where you are. It helps you to plan your next actions and to predict future events. You can imagine that similar situations may have arisen over the millions of years of our evolution, and that knowing where you are could sometimes be a matter of life and death. In music, the stakes are not so high. But in general, I think we find it stressful when we're uncertain about the situation that we're in, about the structure of the environment beyond our immediate perceptions, and we feel pleasure when certainty is restored. One final point, going back to the Mozart. I've said that we feel pleasure when the main key is clarified, but the main key was also very clear at the beginning of the piece. Why should the reassertion of the key be more pleasurable than its original assertion? It's often been observed that the pleasure of a situation is not only due to the quality of the situation, but to the change in quality in relation to the previous situation. This is what David Huron calls contrastive valence. If I lose my car key, I feel bad and stressed. I'm probably going to have to spend $100 to replace it. When I find it again, I feel happier than I did before I lost it, though my situation is no better than it was then. The same is true for musical keys. Sorry for the terrible pun. So I think it's no surprise that the pleasure of a tonal reassertion is greater than the pleasure of the original assertion of the key. All of our examples have been from 18th, 19th, or early 20th century music. Do tonal reassertions ever occur in more recent music? Very rarely, as far as I can tell. I do know of one, which I'll use as my final example. It's from Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical The Phantom of the Opera, at the end of the song The Music of the Night.
Help me make the music of the night.
That same chord progression happens again at the very end of the musical. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you'd like to leave a comment, I'd be interested to know if you agree with me that tonal reassertions after purple patches are enjoyable, and if you have other good examples of them. Thanks for watching.